What's up, disciples? It's Zach Zender, and I'll be joined by Chris Johnson in just a moment, and we're excited to have you for this week's episode of Red Letter Disciple. Our mission is to challenge you to be the greatest disciple you can possibly be. Come on, we know you can get greater, you can get better, you can live up to your potential to be the best disciple as we follow after him. So today's conversation, I think, will go a long way with that. We're talking with Jason VanRuler, who is a therapist that had a broken past, that was not only able to get past his past, but then he wrote a book called How to Get Past Your Past. It's pretty awesome. He's a therapist, and so we talk about the role of therapy in a disciple's life. And as a pastor, I know we promote counseling, we promote therapy, but I also wondered, isn't there good therapy and bad therapy? And how do we know that we're getting the right therapy? Plus, we end up discussing if Jesus was not just a carpenter, but maybe he was a therapist too. And maybe he was a pretty good one. We'll find out. It's going to be an awesome episode today. Today's episode is sponsored by Red Letter Living. We create resources that challenge people to grow as disciples. Of course, this podcast is one of them, but we also create our niche is 40-day challenges that you and your entire church can go through. And I want to tell you about one of those today. It's the book Forgiving Challenge. And the reason I want to tell you that one is because I really believe our conversation today really hits at what the heart of Forgiving Challenge is all about. Forgiving Challenge is a 40-day resource to truly help people experience God's forgiveness, His grace, and His freedom. You're going to hear in the podcast today from Jason that it's really hard for people to forgive themselves or to receive that forgiveness from God. Sometimes it's easier to forgive others than even our own selves. And that's really where we honed in on that 40-day forgiving challenge, recognizing there's a lot of great books that teach you how to forgive somebody else, but not a lot of material that just really give you a deep dive into understanding what God's forgiveness is all about. And that's what this one will do. So pastors, we want to launch with you in a 40-day challenge in your church. We've launched more than 1,000 40-day challenges in churches across the world and seen incredible results. We know that not only will teach you great content that is all about discipleship, but we can grow your small groups by 40%. We can bring unity in even somewhat of divided times and provide a turnkey resource that doesn't just have books, it's got videos for small groups, sermons, kids curriculum, graphics, you name it. We'd love to partner with you. And so here's what you can do. After Easter or fall of this year are two really strategic times to launch. Maybe you've already got the year planned out, and so you want to get a jumpstart on New Year 2026. And I know you're thinking, come on, seriously, we're talking about 2026, Zach? Hey, the engine of the church keeps going. And some of y'all got things so planned out that pencil in a 40-day challenge now for New Year or next year if you can't do it this year. And it's a really awesome experience to receive God's forgiveness. Imagine your whole church walking in that freedom. Not only will they be free and forgiven, but now they're going to be the most forgiving people in the planet, and they're going to be in your church. That's amazing. So here's what I want you to do. Go to forgivingchallenge.com. Forgivingchallenge.com. You can find out more about this resource. Pastors, if you would like a free copy to see if this is right for your church, we'd love to do that. Just email our team at hello@redletterchallenge.com, but we'd love to work with you. Before we get to Jason, I just want to take a quick moment and say thank you for those who have subscribed and followed, and also who have rated and reviewed. If you haven't done those things for a podcaster, it means the world to us. That's what you can do to show your appreciation. And so if this has meant anything to you, we'd love for you to, I don't know, what do they say? Smash that button or hit that thumbs up or smash the plus sign, whatever it might be. And then spend a minute or two writing a review. Let us know what episode you really enjoyed or was your favorite or what you want to hear about more in the future. We want to serve you best, and that means the world to us. And so Jason VanRuler is today's guest on the Red Letter Disciple. Let's do this. Welcome back to the Red Letter Disciple. Today we got Jason VanRuler. I like that last name.
Yeah, that's awesome. It doesn't get much tougher than that.
He is one of the most sought after therapists on relationships, trauma, and personal transformation.
Boy, do I have some questions for him.
And I thought I need to bring him on because of our relationship, Chris.
Yes,
but anyway.
yes. That's one of many sour ones. Go ahead.
He's helped thousands show up as their best self, to get connected and have exceptional relationships. He speaks on stages to thousands, topics like trauma, integrity, burnout, relational intimacy, all all the important stuff. And
Right.
been featured in New York Times and the #1 Amazon bestseller book, Get Past Your Past, which we'll talk about today. All around great guy. He's from Sioux Falls, and I got to meet him a couple of months ago, and we got to connect with one another and thought he'd be perfect for our Red Letter audience today. So, hey, welcome to the Red Letter Disciple, Jason VanRuler.
There he is. Hey,
Thank you
Jason.
so much for having me. This is fantastic. I've been looking forward to it.
We are thrilled to have you. All right, man, I want to jump right into your story. We're going to have a good talk on therapy today and its importance. I think that's really awesome for us to talk through. But when I first met you, I remember hearing a little bit of your story, and so you can kind of catch me up on it. But you wanted to write a book because you'd gone through some things and you wanted to share your journey. You had the idea. I think you might even had the book written, and you went to a publisher and they said, great idea. Everything looks good, but you have no social media following. So go get a really large social media following and then show back up again. And I think a lot of people would have given up, and you didn't. You took their advice and you built one. Tell me about that.
Yeah. And also, like, how long does that take? I mean, that's incredible. I'm really anxious to hear this story because currently I have 7 Facebook followers. So go ahead.
Yeah, I had my grandma following me, and she was very engaged. She was a great follower, but the publisher was not that impressed with it. So I was like, I could add my uncle, I could add my brother,
Right.
and they're like, think bigger, Jason. So for me, I mean, honestly, I wanted to be a therapist. I wanted to write a book since I was a kid. I've even got a journal from when I was 8 where I wrote down that as one of my life goals.
Wow.
And I always tell people I wanted to be a therapist because I just always dressed like one. And so career opportunities were limited. I already had the corduroys and the
nice.
penny loafers. And so,
Yeah. They hand that to you after you graduate.
yeah, everybody knew this guy's not going to be a pro athlete. So let's try to pick something that aligns with what he's doing. So I wanted this my whole life, came through some tough times, did some work, got to a place where it seemed like it could be possible. And then, yeah, just like you said, talked to a publisher and an agent, and they just said like, hey, this is a great idea. Everybody's got great ideas. You're not that different that way, but you need a following. And so that was really hard for me to hear because I sort of thought if I just told somebody I wanted to write a book, like somehow that would happen. And I did not expect to be challenged. And so I often tell my clients, you know, we all say we have faith until we don't get what we want and that we have a challenge. And so I was faced with a challenge. But I had felt like God had called me to write the book. And so I heard that and I just said, I guess I'm going to be a social media expert now. I haven't been, I haven't really done much of this. I'm not really a guy that posts, but I'm going to learn how to do it. And so what I did is I learned how to do it. But I'll tell you the secret. And the secret really just is that you show up consistently.
Yeah.
You know, I will tell you, it took me, and it was literally on my 286th post that something finally blew up. 286.
Yeah.
That was a lot of posting, throwing it into the ether with nothing coming back before something happened. And then it did. And so then you just keep going. And so that was kind of my secret is just I didn't stop, and I was okay if it looked kind of awkward. When I initially started, I would kind of do this 2-hand wave thing that still makes me sweat when I do it now. But I would do that. That's how I'd open a video, is a very uncomfortable waving and sweating and sort of not being very helpful. And so you develop as you go, but you have to keep going.
So what was post 286?
Yeah.
What blew up?
Because we think it's great, but we just rather jump to 286.
Yeah, let's get to 286. So
you know what? It was not the thing I thought. Yeah, it was, you know, I'd certainly spent way more time on other ones, but I'll tell you the secret was that on post 286, I was just me.
Oh.
I actually stopped doing the thing where I was trying to be somebody else and do what worked for other people and to just be myself. And I think that came through. The authenticity is just like, this is who I am in real life. And that really resonated with some people. Now, again, the thing about social media is you're not trying to be everything to everyone. You're just trying to find the people who appreciate who you are. So the only way you really do that is to be authentic. And I honestly think it took me that long to figure out, like, oh, that's the secret sauce, is to be yourself.
So I was going to say, practically, what did that look like for you to be yourself? Like, what was different about you being yourself in 286 that maybe was not there in the first 285?
He dropped the hand waving.
No, I actually just did this the whole episode. So it was the whole entire time. It was this.
More hand waving.
This is who I am.
This is who I am.
These crazy hands.
No, I get to help people with social media now. And here's what I'll tell you is, one of my favorite verses, there's nothing new under the sun. It's true. It's true about information. So what really makes you unique is how you curate information that exists and then your unique take or perspective on it. And so the problem is if you're not being authentically yourself, you can't have a unique perspective. And so for me, I don't know that I introduced any, game-changing information for anybody, but I was honest and authentic about my perspective. And that's what resonates with people is when you're willing to take the risk to say the thing that maybe not everybody agrees with, that tends to be the thing that leads to growth.
And so were you doing mostly videos at this point? And what platform were you trying to grow?
Yeah, so I started with Instagram. So I was doing reel after reel after reel. I tried doing static posts. They sometimes worked, but they were not great for followers, still aren't great for developing a following. Really, it's all about reels. And then after I developed a following, I expanded to TikTok, Facebook, Threads, X, all those things. So YouTube, I started to kind of go a little bit bigger and have a bigger scope. But I would say if you're start with one and become a master at it because they're all a little bit different.
Well, it sounds like you spent a lot of time on social media trying to build this following, almost like it was your job.
Yeah, totally.
And so did you have certain parts of the day marked out? Like I'm gonna try to build my following from like 9 to noon today, or did you block that off, or how did that become part of your routine?
Yeah, I mean, I did block it off. So I see clients, I speak, I do all these things. So I have to be pretty careful about my schedule. So I did block it off. But then when people commented on something, my approach was just, I want to be everybody's best friend. And so how do I be a good friend that responds? And so what I want to do is respond quickly. And so when I had lunch or I would have a minute here or there, I would do my best to build relationships with people that I still actually have today, which is really cool. There's people all around the world now that I'm like, hey, I know these people through Instagram just because I was quick to respond and to comment.
And then I'll let Zach ask some questions, but I'm just fascinated by this. So to recap, for somebody who's getting started that's trying to build their following, you recommend Instagram and you recommend the reels more so than the static post, which you weren't catching much on.
Yeah, especially if it's on a topic where people need to trust you or have authority, it's helpful to see someone's face.
I see. And so you started doing that, and then you were like, what were your posts mostly? Were they about mental health, or would you comment on other things that you saw? Like what were they?
Yeah, I mean, it varied, quite honestly, because I kind of tried everything. I was like, I'm going to do everything and see what works.
I see.
But what's really happened to work for me is over deliver on value. If you want to grow a following, you have to over deliver on value or it's not going to happen. And so the challenge, I think, with a lot of businesses and even people who want to develop a following is they want the following. And so they go, well, it'd be great if you just gave that to me. And that's just not how it works. You have to actually over deliver to get people to want to follow you back. And that takes time. And it's kind of a challenge with social media that not everyone has the capacity for it, because not everyone has room in their life to over deliver on something that they might not get a return on. That's not always the case for everybody. And so I caution people if they say, hey, I've got a super packed schedule, I don't actually have any time to dedicate to this, but I want a following. I go, well, how is that going to work?
Yeah, I just followed you on Instagram right now during this podcast. So if you could follow me back,
I'm responding right now. I'm actually, you can't see it, but I just
incredible.
I just followed you. He's got 146,000 followers now.
Yeah. So talk to me. Okay. The publisher said that. You're like, okay, cool, I'm going to do it. What does that look like from the amount of time that it took to the amount of numbers that they were looking for? And then, you went back to the publisher and said, boom. And then what?
Yeah. I mean, it was great. So it was probably 6 to 8 months from the time that they said that to that happened. And then what was interesting is that I was being approached by publishers. So then it kind of shifted to where I had been a person hoping people would take a risk on me. And then they started approaching me saying, hey, will you give us a chance? Cool. And so that was a really cool feeling. What I'll tell you, and this is something I just had to learn the hard way, so maybe it's helpful to people. When you develop your own platform, that will always go farther than trying to get someone else to give you theirs.
Mm.
And so I think when I first started some of this, I was like, well, if I could just speak there or do this or get access to somebody else's stuff, then maybe people would come to me. But actually, the reverse tends to be true. If you want to become a speaker or you want to do these things, like build your own platform so people know what they're getting, because you have complete control and ability to build that for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And so you highly recommend against buying Chinese followers.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I did it. The 286 posts I gave up and I just bought them. And I've never looked back.
Pennies on the dollar. I mean, pennies, literally pennies on the dollar.
I think that's really good, because I think we have a lot of pastors and spiritual leaders listening, and some of which are thinking about their online influence and their platform and wanting that for themselves. So what advice would you give them, good, bad, or indifferent, if they're in that sort of zone where they are leading something, but they are feeling called by God to have some sort of larger influence, which we're seeing more and more of today?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if you're feeling called to it, for sure, do that. But I think be yourself, be authentic, be relevant, have a perspective that's yours, that makes you unique. And then just from kind of a technical standpoint, the other thing is that Instagram and all social media really is just a social media platform. We're seeing with TikTok, they're saying it's going to shut down. I guess we don't know 100% yet, but it seemingly is going to. And so what's really true is that if you can't get people off platform to a newsletter or something like that, where you actually own the ability to contact them, that following is always going to be at the risk of what the social media platform does. And so the other thing is, if I were to go back and start over again, I would just say, like, I would start a newsletter at the same time I try to develop a social media following, so that most of my following is on my newsletter. That way, if a platform shifts or changes or goes out, I still have that audience.
That's good. And that's what I recommend too, as you build your platform. At the very beginning, I wish I had that too, because it took me 2 or 3 years into this to start realizing I got to start getting emails and phone numbers. And that's really where the power is long term, because you own that, as opposed to those rented spaces that you're on. But I love and I do think it's true, like in the book writing world and speaking, there are publishers that can help, but you are your best marketing, if you will. Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you care the most. And so that's the challenge, is sometimes we think we're going to, contract somebody who's going to care as much as we do or be as invested, and they just aren't. And that's just human, so it's understandable. So it's kind of like, if you won't do it, why would someone else? And so that's even just kind of an important thing to learn about. If you only want to do social media because you want to sub it out to somebody else, you're going to probably have a tough time growing it unless you hire someone really expensive who's done it for a long time.
That's probably why I wonder why it feels like I care more about this podcast than you.
What's that?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I wasn't listening. Sorry, I know you said something, but I wasn't listening
to my Spotify. I'm sorry.
All right, Jason, let's talk about your book. It feels like the main message is right there in the title. It's the simple title: "Get Past Your Past." So tell me, how do we do that, and how can people get past their past?
Yeah, I mean, it is in the title, and so that actually has stalled out a bunch of sales for me. So that was kind of a whoops, is to put the secret as the title. But that is the goal, right? Is that we all have a past. Some people have pasts that are marked by trauma and abuse and really big, ugly, messy things. And other people just have some past hurts and wounds, and they would consider those smaller. But we all have this decision to make every single day, which is that, am I going to be in the place I'm in today, focused forward, pointed in that direction, or am I going to be looking backwards or carrying something from the past that actually, inhibits me from doing the things I need to do? And so the book is really about what do I do if I feel like I can't get past that, and what are practical strategies to do it?
As I was reading through the opening part, it felt like this book is very personal to you, that you probably have a past to get past. And so is that why you wrote it? Because you've gone through this, and through whatever training experience, whatever God's shown you through scripture and other ways, you've learned these things and you want to help others do that?
Yeah, definitely. I had a vulnerability hangover for about 6 months after the book came out. So, there was that where I was like, I think I'm going to tell everybody my secrets, but let's make it a book and let's sell it. And then I'm like, everyone knows my secrets. And so for me though, it was I felt called to write the book because I had been through some things that were really difficult for me and had found a way through lots of therapy and coaching and all the things to kind of get to a different place. And I work with a lot of clients, and I just thought, what is an easier on-ramp than therapy? Nothing against therapy. Therapy's great. But I thought, hey, not everybody can afford therapy. Not everybody's in a position where that's actually going to make sense in their life. And so if someone came to me and they said, I'm just really burdened by my past, what could I tell them that would be accessible to them in a book and actually useful that I've gone through? And so then I wanted to share a bit of my story just to say, like, not only am I an expert in terms of academic training, but this is something I've lived out too, for whatever it's worth.
Talk about the power of vulnerability, especially, again, we have a lot of pastors listening. How can we be vulnerable? Is there a way to be vulnerable that's winsome? Is there a way to be vulnerable that's like across the line too far? You know what I'm saying? So
that's a great question.
Thanks,
actually,
Chris. You've never said that.
No, that is a great question,
that
because
feels really good, like a breakthrough almost.
it is, because I have gotten in trouble with this with my wife, like preaching from the pulpit when I was a rookie, and I would share some story, and the car ride home would be miserable. And it was like, why didn't you tell me you were going to share that to like 400 people? I wish you would have done that. And I'm like, well, everybody says I'm an open book and I'm authentic. She's like, maybe not be such an open book. So, yeah.
And I kind of do find it sometimes easier to be vulnerable in front of 1,000 people than I do one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, talk to me about vulnerability, how that can be a strength or a weakness, or what to watch out for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys both said it so well. It's time and place, and you have to be able to read the room. Vulnerability is really helpful, and it is a connection point for really everybody. But again, if you go too far too fast, sometimes you give people whiplash, or sometimes other people say, maybe that wasn't your story to share. Sometimes we're vulnerable about things that actually include other people's vulnerability, and they go, hey, I didn't sign up for that. And I think pastors wrestle a lot with that, because their life is sort of always being speculated by all the people in their church. And so it feels easy to share a family story that has some vulnerability attached to it, but that means then everyone else is included.
Yeah.
And so what I talk to people about and clients about is, I want you to imagine vulnerability in your life as a bullseye. So in the most center circle would be 100% vulnerable. Like, you tell every single thought you have, all the things, all the way, right? And then going out, it's 80, and then it's 60, and then it's 40, and then it's 20. You have to kind of think in terms of, what type of situation is this? If I am speaking to a large audience, that's probably a 40% vulnerability opportunity for me. I can share generally about the thing, but I'm probably not going to share all the specifics, just because it's not helpful, and maybe it doesn't even honor the point I'm trying to make. Whereas my wife is 100, right? I would tell her my hopes and my dreams and my fears, and we can sift through those together, but that's an earned position.
Yeah, that's good. I love thinking about it that way. So why do so many find it difficult to get past their past?
Yeah, I think we get really comfortable with it, even if it's bad. The thing is that our brain just loves routine and habit, and it's always looking for, how do I kind of keep things as efficient as possible and keep them the same? And so we end up falling into these cycles of behavior that we've been taught, because it's just what we know. And so the challenge is, unless we're willing to have some discomfort and to learn a different way to do it, we're always going to default back to what we know, because it's just what we know.
Yeah. So even if it's bad, we can just get comfortable with it, accept it for what it is. The long-term ramifications of that are what?
Yeah, we just recreate the cycle. It's that generational trauma, the generational curse, because we're just doing the same things that were done to us, and we're hurting people the same way that we were hurt. And so the challenge is, if we really want to change it, we have to declare that it stops with us. And the good news to me is that God is so willing and ready to help us walk that out, but we have to be willing to take the hard first step.
And so what are some of those hard first steps there? I heard you say it's the cycle stops with us. Is that the first step? Or what if someone is stuck in the past today and they're having a hard time getting past it? What would they do?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think the first step, and I say this with love, but it's something I had to go through, was just I am responsible. Regardless of what's happened and if it was deserved or not deserved or trauma or abuse, I'm responsible for what I do with that. And I think that can be really freeing because it allows us the ability to take action. I think where we get stuck sometimes is we say, I'm actually not responsible for that. That's somebody else. And we spend a lot of time looking to other people to make something right that they're just not going to make right.
Yeah. So I'm responsible. That doesn't necessarily mean like, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm responsible for what happened to me, but I'm responsible with what I do with this. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Sometimes they're responsible for what they did. Sometimes they're not responsible and it was done to them, but they are all responsible for whatever they do with it. Is that?
Yeah. I'm responsible for what happens next. Yeah. And to your point, obviously, if it's abuse and trauma and things like that, certainly that's not the message I'm trying to send is like, well, you're responsible for that. Sure, but it's regardless of what's happened to you, you are responsible for what you do with that. And that's both a beautiful and a challenging thing because we have to make a decision. And the decision is really, am I willing to try to do it different, even though it'll be uncomfortable?
That's good. And so at some point I know you're a licensed therapist as well. And I do think that, sometimes it's getting more and more accepted, I think, and affirmed as a good thing for a lot of people to go through today. But talk to me about the role of therapy in our lives, even as pastors or leaders. I obviously believe in it, but I think sometimes we can say like, go to therapy, go to counseling. And like anything, I've had, let's say, good and bad experiences with counselors and therapy. And I feel like
Amen.
If all we do is just promote the industry, which we should, but we don't, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's good counseling and bad counseling, right? And so the problem I think I hear from some people is I tried that. But then when I listened to what they went through and who counseled them, like it wasn't a good counselor and it was bad advice, bad therapy. And so how do we know like if we're getting good counseling or good therapy, if that makes sense?
Yeah. There's a lot there. And I would just start by saying, I obviously think therapy is the answer for everything and you should just go forever. And that's great for the business. And so if you could do that, that's my little plug. By the way, if your listeners haven't discovered, I'm a bit sarcastic. So I've got a dry sense of humor, a little bit sarcastic. So I just want to qualify that. I love the momentum that therapy's gotten, especially in the faith community, because I think there is a need for it. I think it's helpful, but it's not the only thing. Being a faith person, God is the only thing. So that for me, it's sort of like therapy can be the mechanic that helps get you back on the road, but it's not your co-pilot. And so we just want to be really careful about what sort of relationship this has in our life to who we are and what we're trying to do. And then even if we go back to what I just said about getting past or past, if I'm responsible, I still have to decide what to do with that. So if I'm getting really bad advice or feedback, I'm having to live with it. And so I think sometimes what happens is that we say to people, we'll just go to therapy and do what they tell you and it'll all be fine. And people get really hurt. And the reason they get really hurt is because, like you said, not everyone's going to be out to help you the same way someone else is. And that's because of skill and where they're at in their life and all those things. And so I think therapy is a great start, but really what we have to learn how to do is discern, how does this fit into my life and is it helpful? And if it's not helpful, then what can I do that might be?
Yeah. I get so frustrated at times when like someone does actually take you up on it and they seek the counseling and then they come back and they say, well, I sought the counselor and they said this. And like, I don't know if it's relationship or let's just call it marriage advice. They're thinking about divorce and like clearly they're giving them bad counsel. And so they've done what I wanted them to do, but they didn't go to the right person. And now they're going with that advice. And it's, I don't know how to handle those situations. That's hard.
So the other side of that, like, my background, I grew up, it was a horrible childhood that I had, abuse, all kinds of stuff. And then finally, when I went to college, I said, I've got this baggage I feel depressed. I'm going to go talk to somebody. And like anybody knows, the first couple counseling sessions are very hard. Like they are very hard. You've got to unpack stuff, you know? And so I had this older gentleman and I was on my third session and I'm pouring my heart out to this guy and he's like falling asleep on the couch. And I was so ticked off, you know? And so then I had my other counselor said, there's good counselors, there's not so good counselors. It's just like a doctor, you know, don't give up because you had one bad session. But then the idea of going and unpacking that all again to somebody else just felt like so much pain, you know? So, I got to set up a session with you, I guess, Jace.
Yeah, well, and I sleep during most of my sessions, so it's clearly not going to be a good fit for us because that seems to bother you. So I know that now. No, I mean, I look at it. I had this wonderful colleague that just said, like, there are therapists for seasons, and you know, the thing is in my life, obviously I am a therapist. I've gone to therapy most of my life, will go for the rest of my life. And I've had different therapists and some have been amazing at certain things and not so much at others. And that's really all of us. And so I think sometimes it's something I enjoy doing is giving clients permission to say, like, I think I've outgrown this, or I think I've heard this message before, or I think I could be more served over here. And as a therapist who wants clients to get better, when a client sits down with me, if we've been working together for a long time and just says like, hey, your voice is in my head, Jason, I know what you're going to say. I think maybe it's time to learn from somebody else. I just go like, that's phenomenal. Like that's actually how this is supposed to work. So I like to just tell people is like, if you don't feel like you're being served by it, it's okay to try somebody else. You don't have to just stay put where you're at if it doesn't help you or give you value.
How important or what role is forgiveness in the process of moving forward?
Yeah, it's really important. And what's really interesting to me is that the forgiveness that most people struggle with is not forgiving others. That's actually a lot more times the exception. What people mostly struggle with is forgiving themselves. And so I see a lot of people get really hung up on doing all the right things. You know, they're like, I did all the steps and it's like, that's great. Well, but you're still stuck. And I wonder why you're still stuck. And when we really drill down, they're still stuck because they just can't let it go for them. They just say like, I'm unwilling to forgive that I did that. And so I'm just going to kind of keep it honored and hold that light on and refuse to move forward to somehow honor the fact that I made a mistake or did some things I don't like. And so with clients, what we're trying to get them to work on is actually, how do I forgive myself in a way that actually helps me to move forward?
Yeah, it's so good. And I found that to be true. And even was in my book, Forgiving Challenge, I noticed most people, when I asked rooms, it's probably 80 to 90% of people struggle far more with receiving forgiveness from God or, quote, like you said, forgiving myself. And I do think there's a lot of books, and they're all fine on forgiving others. There's not a lot on what does it look like to receive God's forgiveness so that I can really, truly forgive myself. And that's the direction I went because I think it's the deeper thing underneath the other thing. I think if we know that we are forgiven and can forgive ourselves, then we will do really well at forgiving others, which is really awesome. And so I'm kind of curious, you know, I see in your bio, you want people to show up as their best self. And I think sometimes that language gets knocked a little bit in the Christian world, like become the best version of yourself is what I'm thinking. And I'm just kind of wrestling with what to do with that because I think I can understand that perspective, but I also understand, and our podcast is about being great disciples, which in my mind, like, is your best self. And so talk to me a little bit about how showing up as your best self can really lead to being great disciples.
Yeah, well, I think to me, being your best self is just being willing to take the next step towards the thing you're called to. And so I think when we do that, we are our best self. I don't know that there's ever this destination we get to where you get an award. I mean, that'd be pretty cool, but it hasn't happened for me. So, you know, there's no trophy. But I think it's just what I see with clients and even in my own life, it's being our best self is just being willing to be pointed in the right direction and to take steps and listen. And I think even to just kind of what you were talking about, being willing to receive the gifts we have. You know, so many times it's kind of like, well, I want to follow, but I've got all these conditions. You know, I'm not going to receive, or I'm not willing to do that. And so I think being the best version of ourselves or best self is just really about being willing to honor what we're called to and then taking steps towards that.
Yeah, and I think it could be somewhat of a language thing or semantics. I think sometimes why it gets knocked, because I don't understand why anybody would actually be against being the best version of yourself. I think that's what God created us to be. Like, even, we're somewhat in the new year here still. And so even, that this time of year, some set resolutions or goals. I've noticed less and less are doing that, by the way. But, and a lot of those, at the root of them is so that they would become a better version of themselves. And I think that's awesome. That ought to be celebrated, not like, I don't know, poo-pooed on, which I feel like it does sometimes get that in the Christian world.
Well, sometimes it just gets thrown around so much that just the terminology, but ultimately God wants us to be the best of ourselves. Yeah.
And we can't be that if we're still stuck in our past.
But so many people are.
Yeah.
Right. But I guess what I say to clients is like, and this is true for me, be your best self today. So like, what's a 10 out of 10 day for you? Do that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we aim way too far in the future and we say, well, I want to be this person then. And I just say, like, what can you do today that actually sets you up to feel a little bit like you're on the right track?
It's good. If we can't get like past our past, like what are the consequences that we're feeling in the current day, in the present, if we're still stuck?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the old things that happened, we're still carrying with us. And so it's kind of like carrying this really heavy backpack along with us through our whole life. And so we have these beautiful moments and times that are really wonderful, but all we can think about is what we're carrying. I've got this thing when I'm working with a client. It's kind of a strange thing, but I'll tell you, if someone's like wrestling with someone, something they just can't let go. I like to go on like these hikes and I'll carry a weighted backpack. And so I'll just like write a little sticky note, the thing that they're carrying, and I'll just walk with that. So I got like this 30-pound backpack and I'll go walk a couple miles. And just the feeling I have of when I set that down is so powerful. Just to take that off and set it down. And I just approach the whole world and my life differently. And so I talk to clients about what would it look like for you to just take that 30-pound backpack off that you've been carrying your whole life and to give someone you love a hug or to show up in those situations a little bit different.
That's a really good image. I think I get a piece of that when I drop Chris off at the airport after we record the season.
Definitely more than 30 pounds. Feels good. Feels good.
That feels good. Oh, I love it. If you say in the book that if we can't get past our past, we can't truly connect with others the way we're made to. Obviously, if we're feeling like we're carrying a 30-pound backpack as we're experiencing and connecting with others, what do you mean by that? Why do we struggle to connect with others if we can't get past?
Yeah, because we're not present. So that would be the first thing. And then if we're unwilling and we go to somebody who is willing, that creates some real problems with connection, right? Because they're willing to do something we're not and have some vulnerability. And so one of the first things we can do to actually develop connection if we feel like we're stuck is just tell someone you're carrying the backpack. Just to say like, hey, in case you didn't see it, this is what I've been carrying around with me and it's really hard and I don't know what to do. And what's interesting is that's almost always the start of connection. I know you both have been in lots of rooms with people and it's same to me, like when someone says, well, I'm going to kind of talk about something or confess a struggle I'm having, but I'm sure nobody else knows. Somebody else already has that struggle, right? Have you ever seen someone say it and then everyone is just silent? No. Everyone's like, oh yeah, me too. That was yesterday. Or me too. That was last week. And so the first step is just to acknowledge you're carrying it. And it's amazing how much that even sparks connection.
That's really cool. And yeah, I think it's, we inhibit so much when we hold on to things and we can't have the true relationships that God calls us to have as disciples with one another. And I think that's really the beauty of being a great disciple when we're really living this out is we're not doing it alone. Mm-hmm. And, I think that there's so much of a loneliness problem that I think we struggle with. And how much of that do you think is due to kind of the stuff we're talking about of people just not willing to open up or get past and share? And is a lot of the loneliness from that, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it's playing it small. And that's not to say people don't have good reason or that's not because of past hurt. So I'm not picking on people, but I think we're lonely because we've gotten to a place in our world where we don't really have to put ourselves out there if we don't want to. And so we don't. And the challenge with that is then we don't have connection. And so it is an act of courage to put yourself out there. And it is really the antidote to loneliness. But it means, again, we're going to have to be a little bit uncomfortable to get started. And, I think even Zach, like about when I met you, we both made the decision to talk to somebody we didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, some days that's an easy choice for me. Some days that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And great things come from those moments, but you kind of have to be willing to take the risk if you don't want to be lonely.
That's really good. Yeah. What do you hope, like if someone goes through your book, and I think the book's more just kind of an outpouring of who you are as a person. Like if someone goes through the book, or if they are a client of yours, like what do you hope happens in that person on the other side?
Yeah, I hope they make the changes that they've been called to make, and I hope they show up differently. The book is a practical guide to kind of say, like, I'm going to walk you through this. But I think anytime that I'm working with someone, honestly, my prayer is just that I get out of the way and God shows up. I think obviously I'm brilliant and I'm really well trained, but I just got to say, like, I haven't made it here because of any special thing I've done. And so my hope for clients is just that I have the wisdom to listen and to speak in the ways that allow them to hear what they needed to hear and do what they needed to do.
I think the thing that I find interesting is that every good counselor, every good therapist that I know always talks about how they're going to continue to do therapy themselves.
Yeah. Well, and you heard Jason say it earlier, I'll do it the rest of my life. Yeah.
I'll do it the rest of my life. Can you speak a little bit into that? Like, what are you trying to and it's interesting to me, like when I sat down with a marriage counselor one time, and I've done pre-marriage counseling for a long time, like I could almost predict what they were going to say to me. I'm wondering if you ever have things like that you're working with your counselor now and you're trying to figure it out. Like, what are some of your goals that you're trying to achieve with lifelong counseling?
Yeah. And that's funny how you say you can anticipate. Sometimes you can. So I started this thing several years ago now where I just said, when I go to therapy, I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. I could do it, but I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And I'm just going to show up. I think so. For me, I do individual therapy, and then every 2 to 3 years, we do a marriage intensive. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is just I've been married longer than anyone else in my family. And so we're in uncharted territory. And I go, I'm going to need some help to do it well. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, I just know there's some areas that I'm going to continue to need help in. And then also it's just I want to continue to grow personally so I can help other people. Mm-hmm. I know that my best working self is when I've done the work I need to do. And if I don't, I have a job where that shows up in my job. Kind of like you both, right? If you're having an off day, that affects things.
Yes.
And it's not that you can't have off days, but if there's consistently things that you're not dealing with that are coming up in your work, people see that and they pay for that. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, sort of part of the job is this agreement that I'm not going to stop trying to get better because I'm asking other people to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. And I think I appreciate that too. We even talked about, well, there's great counselors, there's not so great counselors, great therapists, not so great therapists, great pastors, not so great pastors. But there's also great therapists who have some not so great days. Mm-hmm. And so it's not so simple. And I think what I'm reminded of there, and I think what you see in your work so often too, is like everybody's living out a story. Yeah. And like a lot of times the choices that they might make on the outside, like you don't know what they're going through on the inside. And if we would just like get to that place where we could know someone else, and you use the word connect, I wonder how much that would help us in our interactions with one another. Can you speak to that, or how to have this mindset? Is that important in life to connect well, of like knowing that not only am I going through my story, but they're going through theirs, and how do we keep that front and center?
Yeah, it's so important because otherwise we don't know what we're supposed to be talking about. And so we find ourselves meeting people where we're probably supposed to have a really important conversation, and then we end up talking about the weather instead. Uh-huh. And so we want to have balance, and not everybody's going to get 100% vulnerability, but we want to be willing to open the door a little bit so that people have something to connect to. And if you think, I mean, it's kind of a funny thing, but like if you think in your own life, we just tend to connect better on challenges and struggles we're having more than success and celebration. And that's a funny thing. I mean, that's kind of goes in the face of social media, but when we are honest with somebody, it gives them the opportunity to speak into our life, which is actually the relationship we all desperately want.
That's good. Do you think Jesus would have made a good therapist?
Jesus was a therapist. I mean, this is, yeah, I don't think, I think you can call a lot of people a lot of different things. I think you guys are therapists. I mean, when I think about what is really a therapist, it's a person who sees people and speaks wisdom into their life and listens. Like, there's a lot of people that do that. And so I've got some unique training, right, that makes me a mental health therapist. But I think in a general sense, everybody helps other people all the time if they want to. And so it's just so important to remember that, like, by being a bit vulnerable and sharing your story, and I always call it talking about the messy middle. You know, it's always easy to talk about like the problem or the solution, but nobody talks about the messy middle in between. But when you talk about the messy middle, like, you are a therapist to somebody else who needed to hear what you did to get through it. And so I feel like, yeah, that's anybody who's willing to sit with people offers hope and something for other people. And I think Jesus did that obviously better than it's ever been done before.
Yeah. Good answer, by the way.
Yeah,
That's correct.
That is the correct answer. That is the
Yeah,
correct
I was just reading through John the other day, and you know, so many examples of Jesus just kind of going like, yeah, I hear you, I see you, here's some truth. Like that's don't we all aspire to be that way?
The interesting thing, I was just doing this Bible study the other day that, like, Jesus got asked, I can't remember how many questions, and answered like point blank, like 3 of them.
Yeah.
Like, most of the time, like, he would not directly give them the answer. It'd be a parable or something, but very rarely would he specifically come back and like answer that. And
I wrote a blog. I think it's my most read blog, like 305 questions that Jesus asked.
Yeah, and he
like a couple key findings
like he directly answered like 3 or 4.
Yeah,
like it wasn't that many.
But I think he'd make a great therapist, because even as I think back to what I wrote in that blog, like, he was such a curious listener. Like, a lot of his questions were, dealing not so much with the when side of things, but more on the why or the how side of things, trying to get to the root of it, which is really cool. So
and also just gave people a lot of time to get to the answer. You know, it's obviously the answer is already obvious, but he was just sort of like, hey, I'm going to give you a second to come up with it yourself. Right. And I think that also really helps people change, is when we're patient enough to let them come up with the answer, even if we're dying to shout it at them. Right. We just say, like, I'm gonna ask some questions till you come up with it, because I know it'll stick.
That's good. Well, Owen Wilson might argue with us that Jesus wasn't a therapist, he was a carpenter, but I think we just made a pretty good case that Jesus was a therapist as well. All right, I've got this image that I love looking at the lens of the Bible through this way. I call it flip the weapon. And I see these, what I call flip the weapon stories, all throughout the Bible, where the enemy wanted to destroy somebody by doing something to them. And not only was the person not destroyed, but they would actually destroy the enemy with it. And the reason I bring this up is because I think there's so many therapists that could have been taken down by their past, and they have overcome it. And now they're flipping that weapon to bring freedom and help to others. And, you see that all throughout the Bible. There's, the imagery of David and Goliath, of course, where it was the stone that knocked Goliath down, but it was Goliath's own sword that David picked up to chop his head off, right? You see this on the cross with Jesus. This was a torture instrument meant to kill, and yet it became the symbol of victory for all of us as Christians that we now carry forward. And so talk to me about that in what you do, like how often like it results, like people get past their past and they actually end up using their past in a powerful way to bring freedom to others and maybe even destroy the enemy as they're doing it. Do you see that often? Or
well, that's healing. That's the final step of healing, in my opinion, is that the final step of healing is when we make it bigger than ourselves. And when we make it bigger than ourselves, we help others, which then in turn helps us, but also keeps us on the right path. And so that's the thing, is like, if I'm walking through something with somebody, that's always the last step, is how do I then take what I've learned or gone through? And not that means everybody has to become a therapist or coach, but how do I take it in a way that's accessible to me and to use it for the greater good? Because when I do that, I am actually healed and my life is fully changed, because now I'm in a community where people see me as healed. And so that's really important.
That's cool. And is that not the final step then in AA and all the anonymous groups, right? It's taking what you've learned and actually using it to help somebody else, serving
Yeah.
someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, make sense of the struggle and develop meaning. But I think also just it puts things in context and perspective that we don't see otherwise. You know, if we're not careful, we can start to think that our own issues are the biggest issues in the whole world. And so sometimes it takes working with other people to see maybe it's not just us, or maybe there are people who have similar or greater struggles and they're doing something to get through it. And so sometimes that's actually really inspiring to people.
Yeah, and I just want to inspire people with that. I mean, even your story, Jason, you went through some things that you detail in the book, and here you are helping people bring freedom. And would you be doing this today had you not gone through what you've gone through? I don't know if you would, but it makes you that much more credible. You're bringing healing. And for those who are stuck in the past and you need a vision of where you might be able to move in the future, I don't think it's too far stretched to look at whatever you've gone through, might be the thing that brings healing to somebody else, which will not only help them immensely, but you'll find a ton of joy in it. But let's do the hard work and get through what we need to get through. And part of that hard work is buying Jason's book and getting on that path. So, all right, Jason, hey, you've been awesome today. We ask all our guests, this is a discipleship podcast. We want to challenge people to be the greatest disciples of Jesus that they can be. So anyone who's listening, practically, if they can do one thing this week to be the greatest disciple, what would you challenge them to do?
Yeah, I mean, the question that I would ask is, what is one thing that you are carrying around from your past that it's time to let go of?
Yeah.
And we all know the thing. So every time I ask that question, everyone gets quiet really quick because it just comes to mind, because everyone goes, oh, okay, I know the thing. I hope he didn't see it. But whatever that thing is it time to let go of it? And how could you do that? Or how could you do it in some small way this week?
That's beautiful. I love it. All right, listeners, if you take that challenge on, #RedLetterDisciple, let us know. We're praying for you. We know that's a big question to ask and a vulnerable question to ask and sift through. So thank you for doing the hard work and getting through it. What you got, Chris?
So we've learned a lot today from Jason. Pastors, you should only be 40% vulnerable to your congregation and 100% vulnerable to your wife, so that's going to require some change from you and me.
Wow. Okay.
And most people also, we learned that most people can't forgive themselves, but they can forgive other people.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Jason, how long have you lived in South Dakota?
Most of my life.
Okay.
I lived in Omaha and Minneapolis briefly, but most of my life.
Got some Omaha blood. All right.
Okay. So
that's why I like
you would here's the thing. I would say 90% of our people that are listening to this podcast don't know anything about South Dakota. Maybe Mount Rushmore, maybe that big motorcycle ride you have. But other than that, I want to quiz you and see if you are a real South Dakotan. Can I do that?
You can. I'm going to fail, but let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Question number 1. I'm from the great state of Florida. I have a question for you. Who has more miles of shoreline? Would it be South Dakota or Florida?
Definitely Florida. Definitely Florida.
That is incorrect. Check this out. South Dakota might be located in the smack center of the United States, but it still has more miles of shore than the Sunshine State. This is in thanks to large part to Lake Oahe.
Yeah, Lake Oahe. Yeah.
It's 231 miles long, the reservoir along the mighty Mo. Wow. So that's crazy. That's crazy.
Thanks, Chris. Everyone thought I was an expert until you did that. So thanks for ending on that.
Chance to redeem yourself, okay?
You can go to therapy after this to get over it.
You have more than 1,300 of these free roaming animals stomping and snorting across Custard State Park. What is the animal?
It's buffalo.
Yes, that's correct. A delicious buffalo right there. Okay.
That's good.
And I'm sure you've been to this. Harley Davidson owners take over South Dakota every year for the largest motorcycle rally in the world. That rally is called?
It's a Sturgis motorcycle rally. I've never been, though. I've actually never been, but that's what it's called.
And now this is the extra bonus question. I've dug long and hard for this one, and I will be so impressed if you get this. If you get this, Zach is buying 100 copies of your book. Here we go. At what bar is it a tradition to smash your empty beer bottle under the dock before ordering another in South Dakota?
Okay. This is a bar in Yankton, and it's in Yankton, South Dakota.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, it is. Boy,
You got the
It's
city.
It's got
Doc?
You got
three
the town
words.
right. You got the city
Three
right.
words.
Oh boy, I bet I know it if you said it, but I know it's in Yankton because it's right by the
It is
river.
in Yankton, so I'm going to give you
Yeah.
half credit. But the first word is the.
Okay. Yeah. That's very helpful.
The last word is
let
house.
me-
The blank house.
Oh, the dock house,
No.
the boathouse.
The ice house. The ice house.
Dang it.
All
Okay.
right. Okay.
Yeah,
So
I just have to say I don't go to so many bars, so that's the reason. I can't,
That's good.
I don't know what to tell you.
You knew it was in Yankton. How far is Yankton from you?
It's about an hour 15 minutes.
And I also read that in South Dakota, every square mile, there's only 10 people per square mile.
That could be accurate. Yeah, it's not well populated.
I think you've got more bison than people in
There
South
you go.
Dakota.
You probably do.
All right.
it.
That's going to do
awesome.
it.
Well, thankfully you only got half of that right. So
He doesn't have to buy $100 bucks.
50 bucks. I mean, 50. That's okay. Not a big deal.
We'll talk offline. We'll talk. Hey, man, if people want to connect with you, Jason, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on socials, jason.vanruler, or on my website, jasonvr.com.
Awesome, bro. Thanks, Jason, for being here today.
On his website, you can get one-on-one coaching. I'm looking through it right now. He's got places to book him for speaking. If you're a therapist or coach, you can go on and get some advice. This is a really great website, so check it out.
Yeah,
awesome,
thanks
bro.
so much.
You're impacting a lot of lives, and we'll put all those links in the show notes. And thanks for being on the Red Letter Disciple today. Stay warm, all right?
Hey, thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, we had a fun conversation on therapy and if Jesus was a good therapist. I think he was a great therapist. So Owen Wilson, he was a carpenter, yes, but he also was a pretty doggone good therapist. And so, hey, today's episode brought up a lot of stuff. And so I'd love for you to check out more of Jason's work. Probably even buy his book, Get Past Your Past. If you want your whole church to go through a powerful 40-day forgiveness experience, which is super related to getting past your past, we'd love to do that. All the links for how to do that are at our show notes. And for how to connect with Jason, you can find those at redletterpodcast.com. It's our honor to serve you, and we'd love to link in with you for a 40-day challenge. And I know Jason would love to help you become the greatest disciple you can be, and you can't be that if you're still living in your past. So let's get past our past and live for the great future God has for us. Next week, we got a fun episode with my friend Carson Baca. Carson is he is the greatest golfer that we've ever had on the podcast. He is right now a redshirt senior at Auburn University on their golf team. Auburn won the national championship last year. And so we go all in on that experience, a really cool story. We go all in on how he brings his faith onto the golf course and how revival is coming to college campuses, and especially like what it takes to have that work ethic that I think sometimes we dismiss Gen Z from having. You're going to see this is a powerful, amazing young man who's got a great testimony, and we're really going to learn a lot of amazing things next week. So don't miss next week's episode, and you won't miss it if you follow or subscribe. And as you're hitting those plus sign or that subscribe, make sure you spend a minute to rate or review, and we'll see you back for next week's episode. God bless you. Let's be the greatest disciples we can be this week.